and record. All right, so we'll go ahead and start since we're a few of us here on today's writing lab, and I know at least one student managed to send me the email with the sample paper of the editing. And really, I just wanted everyone to practice doing some of this first, because I can tell you about it all day long, but it's really helpful to engage in a little bit of practice before, we start talking about it, because then things make a bit more sense. Now, did any of you have any questions about the previous lab or writing in general before we get started on the other stuff?
No.
No either.
Okay.
There's actually.
Yeah, I think we're good. Thank you.
All right. Yay. Okay. So, if you have questions or need some feedback, I've had a couple students contact me and ask for meetings to go over some things. I am the writing editor for this course. So in this course, you can kind of ask me to do some editing. Not for you, but I can help you work on some things. I can't completely edit your paper, but I can at least give you some feedback. So if you are struggling at all in terms of doing any of the, when do you cite, how does this work, then let me know. And
so you would also for example, the assignment that we just that we had, would you be willing to also review it, if we sent you the whole thing, or only specific questions associated with APA and stuff like that?
I can do both. I only automatically review the assignment number 2.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
But if you want help more than that, you can ask. And if I'm able to provide it, then I will, and pretty much should be able to.
Okay. What kind of a lead time do you require?
It depends on what's going on, honestly. I would say a day at the minimum.
Okay.
But if you emailed me Friday, this past Friday, and said, "Oh, I need help," I couldn't have looked at it until Wednesday morning, because I had other all day long obligations, but that's not often. So it really just depends. As soon as you are able to is really the best route.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
You're welcome.
This is Clifford. I just joined. Thank you. I think it was Irika that sent me the link. Where was the link sent to? Was it sent to email? Is it an announcement somewhere? I'm looking at it right now and I'd like to see it on my computer.
Oh, the email. I mean, if you're here, you clicked on it. So
no, but I clicked on it because she sent it to me over WhatsApp, so it's showing up on my phone.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, it's sent it in the email on Indiana Tech email through Blackboard. And
I'm sorry, what?
It's in your Indiana Tech email.
I'm not seeing it. Was it sent today or?
Yeah, just a few minutes
ago. Yeah.
Okay. I'm not seeing it. I'll refresh.
I'll put it in Blackboard as an announcement. If you want to check there, I can do that really quickly. Well, I'll say I can do that. I'm not sure about super quickly.
All right. No, you don't worry about that. I'll try and strip it from this and send it via a different email. You can just go ahead, and I don't want to hold you up.
Okay.
I'm not seeing it. It's not in my inbox for Indiana Tech. So.
Okay. Well, I sent it through Blackboard. So if you do a search, you might be able to find it. So it should say, the course name. It won't come from my name personally, right?
Right. Yeah. In fact, mine came through twice. I don't know why.
Oh, okay. You know what? Since there are 2 classes.
Yeah, I'm not seeing it.
It's possible that who do all of you have as professor? Dr. Daniels or Dr. Cooper?
I know Amanda and I think Cliff have Dr. Daniels.
Yeah.
Okay.
I have Dr. Cooper.
Oh, you have Dr. Cooper? Okay, I didn't know.
Okay, so I did send it to, well, let's make sure here. Okay, I sent it. This is Professor. Let me see who, because I clicked on the two classes, but, oh, since he said it came through twice, maybe I sent it to the same email twice. Okay. And so I'm going to send email again, all users, because I might not have said this. Okay, so you only got it, Cliff, because you got it in a different format.
That's correct. Somebody was nice enough to send it to me through WhatsApp, and I was just able to click on the link, or hit the link. But that's on my phone, and not necessarily on a full size keyboard or a screen where I can see it actually.
Yep, exactly. That's what we want. All right. So I just sent it out to both.
Okay, came through.
Okay. Try the link.
It just came through for me.
Just now sent. Okay. So for those of you who just made it, it turns out that another faculty member had scheduled a class overlapping our class. And since there are only 2 logins, it meant that we couldn't start our class because it thought we had already, started a class. So I had to go to the other login and create everything. And of course, I find this out, like 5 minutes before class starts. Like, why won't it let me do this? Oh, okay. So I apologize for all of that. It seems like there's always a technical issue. So let's actually get to our discussion about editing. So it looks like both classes have the right link now, and maybe we'll have some more people show up. Hopefully so. And I have recorded both areas, and let's talk about editing. So if you recall from writing lab 1, I showed you an example of like how many files I use. And in fact, I'll just go ahead and show you now. Let's see. An example of current research. Let's see. What would be a good example? Oh yeah, that one. That is Lorraine. That's not current. It's old research. Okay. All right, so you can see my computer. This is an article that was published several years ago. And we have our list of articles, right, that we started to move from. And here's the revision docs. And you can see we were on revision 8, revision 9, revision 10. All right, that's the first revision. Here's the second revision they asked us to do. So now we're on revision 13. And if we go to the third revision they asked us to do, we must have ended up in, 18, 19, 20 different formal revisions for this document that was published. So I can show you some other examples of, let's see, coaches. All right, that was a manuscript that was published, and we can see version 8, 9, and if we go to the journal, we can see the copy edits they had us do. I don't actually have a number system on here. But yeah, there are a lot of additions because a lot of edits are required in any document. The one document I think I told you about in the last lab, I had, they made us edit the heck out of that because they also had a word requirement that the word count could be no longer than 6,000 words, and that included references. So we really learned how to edit, because then we would send it to the journal and the reviewers would look at it and they'd say, great, I need you to add all this information. And we'd be like, but we can only use 6,000 words and we're at 5,998 right now. And they'd say, sorry, you need to add this stuff. So we really had to cut down. We had to delete so much other information so we could add the new information. So we really had to do a very good job of editing. And yeah, this is the one you can see there are 6 revisions. And you can see a whole bunch. I'm not even sure we kept track of the number system here. So lots of stuff, lots of editing. One way to do a good job of figuring out where in the world you need to edit, because everybody it makes sense to you because you're the author. You know what you're thinking in your head. But are you able to succinctly, concisely, but thoroughly enough convey that information from your brain to your fingers to the page? And most of the time we think we are, but then when someone else looks at our documents, we get slammed with, well, what about this information? Could you specify more here? Why is this relevant? Et cetera. Or what are you talking about here? And the student knows exactly what they're saying, but they didn't actually put it in the paper. So that's where a backwards outline is really helpful. And I had one of my students do this recently. He turned in a QP, qualifying paper, and it was a little confusing. I couldn't really see what it was he was trying to say throughout, and there wasn't a lot of connectivity between the paragraphs, and the sentences weren't as connected within each paragraph. So I asked him to go back and do a backwards outline. And once he did the backwards outline, he was able to see the flow of what it is that he had actually said in each paragraph, the main point that he was trying to convey with each paragraph. And then he was able to move those words around, those sentences around, those paragraphs around, and then add what he needed to, because he could see what was missing once he had done this backwards outline. So we spent the last writing lab talking about how to do a regular outline, how to take notes. Now we're talking about, once you have the paper written, how do you edit it to make it better? And this is the article that you were to do this week. Yes. So just as I warned you last week, and your instructor warned you before, this is research critique, which means that you'll be reading a lot of articles that feel free to be quite critical about, because they are not great articles. We're giving you room to work with here. So this article is the Ruiz, Wang, and Hanlon 2013 article. And that is how we refer to articles, by the way. We don't refer to them as the titles. The citation is, in a way, the name of the article. So the Ruiz et al. 2013 article says, what makes managers effective in Mexico? All right, so that's their title. And as we go through their introduction and their literature review, you'll be able to see, once you are looking critically, that they have a really poorly written intro and lit review. So having hopefully read the article or looking at the article, you would think that it is about what makes effective managers in Mexico. It's not exactly what they're saying, but let's look at their first paragraph, all right? So they're saying there's ample evidence around the world that countries are facing challenges and opportunities associated with globalization. In Mexico, there are these economic indicators that show which country has taken advantage of these trends. And in fact, Mexico is really playing at a global level. It's now the 13th largest economy in the world, etc. Mexico is also the Latin American country with the highest amount of exports and the second highest foreign direct investment. Then they continue to talk about foreign direct investment. And then they start talking about foreign multinational corporations. And then they start talking about more about NAFTA, free trade agreement. Mexico continues to encourage multinational firms in the country. There's more here on foreign direct investment. So the second half of this paragraph is really all about foreign direct investment, multinational corporations, expatriates working in Mexico. But that's not who their sample was. So their sample were Mexican mid-level managers in Mexico. So they're starting off their paper on the wrong foot. If you read this first paragraph, you are led to believe that this is about expatriates working in Mexico, or at least, people who work at foreign multinational corporations who are employed in Mexico. And it has something to do with import, export, globalization, which that wasn't their data. That wasn't their population. So when you start off your paper, you really want to make sure that you're starting off on the right foot and you're being very clear about what it is that you're trying to address. Get to the point immediately. So my, point of this paragraph was them saying, hey, Mexico has become an economic powerhouse by tapping into the global economy. So that was what I thought they were trying to convey was, hey, look at us. We're really doing a lot and have an impact in other countries and vice versa. Now, again, they continue to talk about foreign direct investment, multinational corporations, expatriates, international assignments with expatriates. And then we have, nevertheless, these expatriates may lack common cultural understanding needed to succeed in a foreign country, which can be costly for foreign companies. Again, did they measure or assess foreign companies or expatriates? No. None of this paragraph is actually relevant. Let me turn on track changes. All right. So, and you know what?
So can I ask a question?
Please.
All right. So I really appreciate how you're explaining this because maybe I'm used to, non-scholarly work, and I just felt that this first paragraphs was kind of building the case as to why leadership, or effective leadership in the Mexican country was necessary, and it was because of all these other things that was being mentioned. So I appreciate you kind of highlighting that. But also, even though the two writers did not mention that they didn't do the study, but they did reference these other studies. Wouldn't that not be enough to reference the other studies of American, I think Australian and Canada?
Well, I have an answer for you, but we haven't quite gotten to the point of what it is they're trying to do. And I think for most people reading this paper so far, they think that this has to do with expatriates and, how Mexican employees work in other countries or vice versa. But that's not what they're actually trying to study. So when it is, you're trying to figure out the goal of the study, what's their research goal, what's their research question, they actually don't give that in their introduction, or they think they do, but they don't. So to answer your question, I'm going to actually put you on hold for a few minutes, until we can go through the paper and you can see why referencing this information is not either a claim, reason, or evidence in support of their argument for their research goal. Does that make sense?
Yep, I'll wait.
Okay, so if this was related to their research goal, I would say maybe it would be relevant, but I would also argue that having so much discussion of this early on means that this must be the main point of their paper. So even if this is a small part of their paper, having it be the first two paragraphs definitely misleads the reader into thinking that this is going to, one, be an issue or be a major issue. And it's really neither one. So one of the things that they do say right here is most research on management and leadership has been conducted basically outside of Mexico. All right, so this is good to know. We're talking about, about culturally relevant research, and you can't just generalize from one country to the other country without conducting, studies and gathering data to see whether or not, that countries are similar or different in certain ways. So I'm actually going to delete this bit here too. Let's not even really talk about foreign direct investment. So really, what they're saying is Mexico is, and in fact, we're going to do this. We're going to copy and paste the claim and put it right here. This is where people get confused. They want to put the claim or conclusion at the end of the paragraph. So, for example, Clifford, you mentioned that they're building up to their argument. In scientific writing, you want to give the argument immediately. In fact, you want to state your claim immediately and then explain why that claim is a good one. So don't build up to something. Start off with it immediately and then explain why you're right. Or why you might be right, or contradictions of where maybe you're not. So doing this backwards outline means that we can basically take the sentence that we put, and maybe that's the claim that they're trying to make. So we don't need the rest of this because this provides sufficient reasons and evidence of the claim that it is that they didn't say, but they should have. All right, so really this is important, but it's buried in the third paragraph, or not buried, but at least not really highlighted either. So maybe what they're saying is little research is known with Mexican participants conducted by Mexican researchers about what makes effective managers in Mexico. And that's really what they're saying here is little is known from indigenous research about effective and ineffective managers in countries such as Mexico. Very few Mexican scholars have written about leadership practices. But because Latin America is becoming more important for multinational corporations, and here's where maybe it's relevant, researchers have called for studies to understand how best to lead people in Latin American countries. So what is it that I said? That we'll leave most research on management and leadership has been conducted in the context of the USA, Canada, and Western European countries. Consequently, little research has been conducted in Mexico by Mexican researchers on management effectiveness. And notice how we also managed to get rid of the rest of that sentence. Indigenous research is just another way of saying research done by the individuals who live there. So we can just say Mexican researchers with an S. And we don't need to say effective or ineffective because effectiveness indicates both. So indeed, since the 1980s, few Mexican scholars have written about management. Well, we've already said that. Duh. Very little research has been done. So that's repetitive. All right, what's the next sentence? However, because Latin America is becoming more important for multinational corporations investing in the world, researchers have called for studies to understand how best to lead people in Latin American countries. So I might say, with this uptick in globalization comes additional expatriate managers who may lack cultural understanding, right? That was kind of what they were trying to say here. So the goal of the paper is, or goal of the study is to examine what? And we're going to get to that in a minute. Our paper is in part a response to this call and reports that the findings of a recent empirical study carried out in 6 organizations in Yucatan, Mexico. So, I might leave some of this. Basically, they're saying other research has been conducted like we have in other countries by these people in the UK and by this person in China. Following these researchers, we define management as this. And, that can kind of is really defining their constructs. I'm going to put that in a new paragraph. So what we have is this. I'm going to... Little information is known about indigenous leadership in Latin America and oversight given its new strength in the global marketplace. Although similar research has examined the same question in other countries, there is disagreement about the cultural styles of Mexican managers. Now, that kind of takes the place of a lot of this other stuff. We really boiled it down to its essential meaning of what it is they're trying to convey. Now, we haven't gotten to this part here about cultural styles of Mexican managers yet, because they start talking about that later on in the review of the literature. So I'm giving you a preview that that's what this point is really, is there uniqueness or differentiation about how Mexican managers may be effective or preferred management styles versus managers in other countries. So this is all really about, as we'll see, is there a universal preference for management type, or are Mexican managers different in terms of what people find to be preferential, if not really effective leaders? All right. So I can tell you that because I've done this activity before. So let's see where in the world that comes from. Okay, so they're saying, as previously stated, we really can't generalize to Mexico from other countries. We've already said that. Additionally, the volume is very small because very few scholars have engaged in these fields. I already said that. Don't need to say it again. Of the few studies that have been conducted, most have been explored Mexican management or leadership through a cultural lens. So most research that has been conducted about Mexico, all right, most have primarily explored Mexican management through a cultural lens. For example, Hofstede looks at these, the cultural dimensions, and this is what he found, that Mexicans feel comfortable with rules but are uncomfortable with ambiguity. So essentially, he's saying, these researchers are saying, describing that Hofstede has found some differences in how individuals in Mexico prefer working for certain management styles. So there are some uniqueness to Mexican, I remember to type the C, Mexican management, preferred leadership, or management. How about preferred management styles? Because they're not really leadership styles. In Mexico. I don't know why my fingers don't like typing that. All right, so that's what they're saying. And they're saying Hofstede's research has been confirmed by some, but questioned by others. This is really important. This is their point, that there is some discussion or disagreement in the literature about whether or not there are universal versus unique preferences for management styles in Mexico. So other people say, nope, that Hofstede is wrong, that there's no real uniqueness or difference. So let's kind of move on down the page a little bit, because I want to show you something, especially since we started off a little late. All right, so you were told to look at argument structure in the class quite a few times by me, by your instructor. That was something you had to discuss in your discussion board. And you had to figure out whether or not something was article by article or argument by argument. Now, I don't know how your assignments or what kind of feedback you got, but I can at least tell you that one of the ways that I can assess whether or not something is article by article is it looks like each paragraph summarizes an article. This whole paragraph about Martinez and Dorfman is basically saying, let me find,
Lyndon,
uh-huh.
this is Kimberly. I was going to ask a question about that.
Yep.
So, how much is too much to extract and quote line by line from a particular article? Like you're stating, they just did a whole paragraph. So, if it adds validity to what you're doing, is it good, or are we being too wordy when we quote full multiple sentences like that?
I'm struggling to hear you a little bit, but it sounds like you're asking to what level of detail you need to edit, like word by word, line by line, how much information is needed to make your point. Is that kind of the question you're asking?
I'll put a question in the question box. Keep going.
Okay. So here's what they're saying. Martinez and Dorfman, they're summarizing how they carried out a study that provides insights into management and leadership in Mexico. Because that's what the paper is about, right? So we don't need to know that they have insights because that's why we're talking about the article. So we don't need that. Just in general, anyway, that's just totally redundant. Every article here is supposed to provide some kind of insight, or else you wouldn't discuss it. All right, so what they're saying is, I'm turning this entire paragraph into one sentence. And what they're saying is, these researchers have found that managers in Mexico may adapt to a culture of paternalism to acculturate to the perceived employee expectation. Okay. And all right, so let me see your question here. Oh, to quote. Yes. Okay. So your question is, how much is too much to quote from an article? I'm going to give you my rule, which is don't quote from an article. Because who's writing this paper, you or them? I have run into papers where there are 2 quotes per paragraph. And I'm wondering to myself, did you just copy and paste this, from other sources? How are you writing this paper when all you're doing is copying and pasting quotes from one article and another article, and your paragraphs end up being a pastiche of quotes from other people? Where's your scholarship? Where's your writing? All right, so I'm really picky on this as a writer and as an evaluator. In addition, when you copy and paste a quote, and there are times when it is appropriate to quote, but my general rule is don't quote unless there's absolutely no other way you can paraphrase it so that it means the same thing. And sometimes that's the case. Most of the time it's not, though. Most of the time you can paraphrase. All right, so if we're quoting, this, we could quote this sentence. These authors found that when managing in Mexico, managers adapt to the culture of organization to the Mexican culture. Or we could summarize that information and add that issue of paternalism, which they have right here in the next sentence. So instead of quoting this whole thing, we can summarize it in one sentence. So by quoting individual sentences, sometimes you could just take what they wrote and sum it up in a more concise and meaningful argument style way. So don't quote unless you have to, because it's better for you to do the writing where the meaning and information comes from your source, but you are putting it in your words. But, there are some things that a lot of students struggle with how to paraphrase in a way that still makes sense, like when you're defining your constructs, right? So you have to define, authentic leadership. And and it has to come from a source, right? So many people will just copy and paste and quote, the definition of authentic leadership. And I'm fine with that. I think that people can certainly paraphrase definitions. But those are harder to do.
Right.
I give a pass on
I
that.
have a follow-up question to that then.
Mm-hmm.
So we do the state your claim, the reason and evidence, and some of the material, the evidence is relatively lengthy, and we just reference generally the author and the date in the paragraph or in flow citation, and then in the reference, an APA style doesn't necessarily call for the exact page number. So like if somebody was trying to review the work to say, okay, well, what did the study say? There would be no way to go directly to where you're referencing. Does that make sense?
Well, there is. It's just not they're going to go to the exact page.
What should you do about that?
APA style does allow you technically to put a page number with a citation, even if it's not a quote. Most writers will tell you not to do that because there is no need to. The point of having a citation is to tell the reader, here's where I found this information. If you have questions about it, go look it up yourself. So that's what the citation does. You don't need a page number for your citation because, in fact, you probably should be summarizing the point of maybe their results section, right? So it's not on one page, it's on 3 pages. So you don't put page numbers in regular citations because the citation is all the reader needs to know to find out what source you use to support your argument. And then they go and they skim through the article themselves. That's what we do. Unless it's a quote, in which case you've got to demonstrate that, which page that quote came from.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so let's move on to the next article by article. See, note, really, each paragraph here begins with a source. So Slater et al., all right, Martinez and Dorfman did this and found this. Slater et al. Explored this and they found this. Oh, Miramontes found this. Bozeman and Fatec conducted a study and they found this. That's really an old source as well, by the way. You want to try and keep things within 10, give or take, years. More recently, Snyder-Jones found this. And there we have the next paragraph. Agata found this. But what does it all mean, right? So if we take a look, they finally get to their point later on. All right. And basically, I will just give you the short version, again, since we're running late. The review of the literature essentially says this, and I'm going to copy and paste this rewrite of their literature review. Okay. All right. So what I have done is I have gone back and said, here's what it is they're actually saying. Some differences show that Mexican employees expect employers to take care of them, to tend to avoid uncertainty, and are unwilling to accept gender inequalities. That's basically a way of saying that there are power differences, uncertainty differences, and gender differences according to Hofstede, right? Others show that in general, Mexicans believe that men and women assume different traditional roles, therefore are willing to accept gender inequalities. Although Hofstede's findings have been confirmed, it's also been questioned by others, right? That's actually comes straight from the authors. For example, Rotundo Fernandez et al. Found Mexicans are comfortable in uncertainty. However, deviations could result from that. All right, so research is divided on whether managers in Mexico may adapt to a culture of paternalism to acculturate to the perceived employee's expectations. This is what Martinez and Dorfman were talking about in that one paragraph summary. So, and I noted here, I would want to know about these Mexican managers. Are these expatriate managers or Mexican managers? But because they started off their whole thing about foreign direct investment. All right, so here's some other kind of qualities about Mexican managers, which suggests that Mexicans, compared to other people in Latin America, not Latin American, are more tolerant to autocratic and participative managers. On the other hand, other studies have found no differences in managerial styles. So, research is really suggesting that management leadership is either culturally bounded, meaning that it is unique to Mexico, particularly when comparing the work values of employees in the USA, Mexico, and Poland, and that's who they studied, Agata 2005. Certain staffing or management practices are influenced by culture. The broad implications resulting from these findings suggest that multinational corporations operating in Mexico should, when managing indigenous workforce, make adjustments to their normal management styles with consideration to the specific values and national culture of Mexico. That's not what they said, but that's what they meant. So basically, this is all talking about, are there universal styles or are there styles unique to Mexican management? So it really ends up being a different paper. Once you read the whole thing, figure out what it is they're saying. All right, so let's skip the globe study. All right, so let's do this. One more backwards outline, right? So Slater et al. Explored the ideal images of educational leadership among administrators in Mexico City and Texas, USA. It's interesting, they have a city and then they have a state. Their findings showed similarities in best leadership practices. All right, this is their point. Similarities in best leadership practices between Mexican and American administrators. So we might say some researchers have found similarities in ideal, what's the word I'm looking for? Ideal or best leadership practices between American and Mexican. I did it again. My finger doesn't like that. Administrators. And we would cite Slater et al., 2006. More recently, in a study on the characteristics of Mexican leaders, Miramontes found that leaders in Mexico use transactional and directive decision-making. So this researcher, and I'm thinking they mean Miramontes, so Miramontes concludes leadership is culturally based and influenced by paternalistic ideals. So we'd say, however, other researchers have found some management styles that are unique to Mexico, such as, what? It doesn't really say. A tendency towards paternalism by management. And we would cite Miramontes, 2008. So one way to avoid doing an article by article structure is to also use parenthetical citations. So instead of saying Slater did this and Miramontes did that and Bozeman and Fatak did this, give the facts and then give the source that found those facts. The emphasis should be on the information generally, not who found that information. Honestly, we put the source there so that, you know, the reader knows that we have one and that they know where to go find it. But really what's important is the fact, is the information, is the claim or reason or evidence, right?
So Dr. Lyndon,
mm-hmm.
Oh, sorry. So if you changed it around so that it looks more like the way you just wrote it,
mm-hmm.
is that then considered more of the argument to argument versus article to article? Because that has been throwing me off so much.
Yes.
Okay.
This is saying, this is not summarizing Slater. They did a study and they found this. They did a study and they found this. Well, how do those relate to one another? Right?
Yeah.
So by saying some researchers have found A, other researchers have found B, then that's an issue. So we might start off with the claim that there is disagreement in the literature whether management style is culturally bounded or universal. And we know that, and we can say that because we've seen the research. We don't need a citation here because that's our claim that we've figured out by then describing who has found what below in the reason and evidence.
Okay. And then it's okay to say some researchers and then only quote Miramontes?
Well, no, that's a really good point, because whenever I say, you know, multiple researchers found or a lot of research has been done on this, you know, you really shouldn't cite one source.
Okay.
So because this says some research, you know, I would prefer it if there was more than one source there. But on the other hand, you actually can say some researchers because this is a researcher, which means it does actually make them some research.
Okay.
But, you know, if we're saying there's a disagreement in the literature and we only cite two sources, that's not very convincing. We've just found two people or two sources that disagree. But if we can find others, like, all right, this one, what did they do? So let's go and look at this, right, the next one, and see if we can figure out how to synthesize this information. This is why your synthesis matrix is so important. Because it helps you not summarize one article and then another article and another article, but synthesize them into an argument structure, as we talked about in our first lab. All right, so what did Bozeman and Fatak find? Again, old source. I'm not even sure I'd use this. All right, so they conducted a study to determine the transferability and feasibility of management practices from the developed to developing countries. They did this. They compared U.S. subsidiaries operating in Mexico with the management practice of Mexican-owned companies of similar size. Their findings indicated no significant differences in management practices of the companies. So you know what we can do? Some researchers have found similarities in American administrators. There we go. There's our other source.
Right.
We don't actually even need to describe what it is they found, because they found the same thing, which is that there are no differences in management styles between, in this case, they actually had American versus, I mean, the thing that they have that's slightly different is they are U.S. subsidiaries operating Mexico compared with Mexican-owned companies of a similar size. But, you know, honestly, that may not be as relevant if we're trying to condense information to an argument. Because the point is, they found similarities in styles. All right, Schneider-Johns found, all right, again, they did this and then they did that and they found no significant differences. You can see how this is just summary. Right, they found no significant differences in quality management in USA and Mexico. So, seriously, we're just going to do this. And we're going to put in order. SN comes after SL. There we go. So I can take this, delete all that, and I can, oops, I deleted my comment. Okay. I can take this paragraph and I can put it right here. And I can delete at least those 3 paragraphs because I've turned it into 1 paragraph. And honestly, it's 2 sentences, which isn't a full paragraph. You need to land at least 4 or 5 sentences to make a full paragraph. So it's 9 o'clock, and since we had issues, you know, I didn't quite get to the full thing, but I think maybe this may have been helpful for some of you, showing you the difference between article by article summaries versus what an argument is. We have our claim right here. In actuality, we kind of have evidence here. We're kind of missing a reason. So maybe some of what they have here is a reason. And so we might add something about the Globe study or Hofstede here, right? So we might say something about this, Hofstede's research. Okay, so really we would paraphrase this about, you know, the dimensions that Hofstede talks about: power distance, individualism, collectivism, femininity, masculinity, and uncertainty avoidance. So here's where we can actually paraphrase this, but, you know, you do have to paraphrase sufficiently so it's not kind of accidental plagiarism. So let's do that. All right. So let's take, right. Then this is where I had that sentence earlier. Hofstede found that Mexicans feel comfortable with rules, but uncomfortable with ambiguity. So we might say, Mexican managers may reflect Hofstede 1980 dimensions, cultural dimensions, and have unique styles. Okay. And now here I'm telling you, you know, oh, don't, you know, do what we call an in-text citation, because who did the study doesn't matter, unless it does. And now Hofstede, you know, study is like the gold standard go-to. Everybody cites this study, you know, you know, so this isn't just about the findings. This is also about who did it. This study is a touchstone. So we're going to go ahead and, you know, slap that name right there up in front. All right. So how might we say this? With regards to uncertainty avoidance, he found that Mexicans feel comfortable with rules, but uncomfortable with ambiguity. So we might say, so Hofstede found that how do we say feel comfortable with rules but uncomfortable with ambiguity? Are how about prefer rules? And they say, as far as power distance is concerned, Mexicans are willing to accept authoritarian managers and uneven power distribution. So Mexicans prefer rules, comma, are accepting of authoritarianism, authoritarianism, and a low power relationship. So I've taken those few sentences and combined them. We might also say in addition or additionally, Mexico is collectivistic, which is a little similar to what they say, but there can be some similarity. Collectivistic and I really do want to say how Mexico is classified as collectivistic and what do I say? Not a preference for, but Mexicans are willing to accept gender inequalities. Well, that's Navarro. That's not Hofstede. And have traditional gender roles. There. So I took that, which is very difficult. I had trouble paraphrasing, but I took this and now we can essentially delete all of this and keep this. And then we can get to the point of the reason. And the reason being, Hofstede's findings have been confirmed by some scholars, but questioned by others. So we will put that here. And this can be, where did I put that? Our reason right here. Now we have a reason and we have evidence. And this paragraph takes the place of at least 4 paragraphs, if not more. And it makes more sense. Okay, questions? This is a lot, I know. What I would recommend to you is to take your paper and go through and do a backwards outline for, you don't have to do the whole thing, but, do a few paragraphs and figure out if you really are getting to the point. And state, and if you have an argument structure, are you making a claim, reason, and evidence? Are you building up to something, or are you starting off, right off the bat saying, here's, the big deal, here's what's important? And do your reasons and your evidence match your potential conclusions? And that's one of the things that's important is consistency. And a backwards outline will help you maintain that consistency And you'll find that when you use, parenthetical citations, and when you reduce the verbiage in your paper, and you are more succinct and clear in your writing, and you don't overwrite, your reader will understand a little better. Using active voice and using parenthetical citations help that. So we don't have to say according to Bozeman and Fatak, because that's what a parenthetical citation is, according to Bozeman and Fatak. Ampersand, because it's in a parenthetical citation. So, I do get frustrated when I read students' papers and every paragraph begins with according to this source and according to that source and this source found. I'm like, just give the facts and put a parenthetical citation at the end so the reader knows where you found it. You don't have to say according to, unless there's no data and you really want to do emphasize the author and not the information or the argument they made. But if you want to focus on the information, give the information, give the citation at the end in parentheses, a parenthetical citation. And that just helps you get rid of extraneous verbiage. And that's, the other thing too, I think I had asked you all to do this. If we look way down here at like their theoretical framework, all right, I'll tell you, bad writing, okay? It is really hard to figure out what their theoretical framework is. So I would say something like this. I don't start a sentence with and. Individuals use these implicit theories to encode, process, and recall specific events and behavior. And I would say implicit, and again, we don't care about, Phillips and Lord have demonstrated this. We care that implicit leadership theories can be best understood in terms of a categorization process. These processes involve classification, and we would put Phillips and Lord right here at the end, so we don't have to go for it in more detail. You don't have to say according to.
Dr. Lyndon.
Mm-hmm.
So so I'm watching what you're doing. How is that not? I'm just trying to make sure that we don't get caught up in this cycle of like plagiarism, because I'm just trying to understand, how did you like flip that? Is that really a summary of what they're saying, and that really still gives credit to them saying it, even though I'm confused?
This is about editing. Like if I were an editor and I edited their paper, this is what I would write as a writer. So I'm showing you, instead of writing what they wrote, which is very poorly written, here's how they could have done a better job.
So at the end of the day, they've turned in something that was like 25, 30-something pages. And when it goes through editing, they're only going to have 6 or something like that. Like it's going to be.
Could be.
So is that good or bad? Because that was the question that I wanted to ask. Like, if we're supposed to be, I mean, I get the intent is for us to make it ours in our own voice, but if we're supposed to be synthesizing and kind of not necessarily redefining what the previous authors are saying, it's really hard to get to the 7 and the 12-page, limits if we're working it all in our own voice. I'm struggling on how to make that happen.
Well, I think your perspective might help if I told you, pretend this is your paper and you're editing it.
Mm-hmm.
So this is an example of how you can take something you've written, and as the author, you change it, thus it's not plagiarism, right? Now, because I'm just saying, this is how, if I were the author of this, I would have written it. So when you're going through something you have written, How would you edit your words? Obviously, that's not plagiarism. But in a way, you have two questions. That was one. The other one is when you're reading other research, like if this were an article I was reading to use as part of my argument in my paper, right? How do I summarize their point and not plagiarize when I write it in my paper, a different paper?
Right.
Well, I wish I had a quick and easy answer for you, but well, the quick answer is make sure the words are yours and the meaning is theirs. And I found that paraphrasing can actually reduce the amount of words that you have. So how do you end up summarizing instead of paraphrasing each sentence, right? So what is the point of this paragraph? This is where the activity of doing the backwards outline can even help you in reading another article. What is the point they're trying to convey in this paragraph, in this page? What's the main conclusion that they come to in their results section? Or, what's the point that I need to describe in my paper that they make? And you write that down. And so
Sorry, can I add to Kimberly's question?
Yeah.
Is it bad if we're paraphrasing and then we end up with less pages than is asked for in our assignments?
Well, that depends. I mean, everything is always, it depends. But a good instructor or editor will always prefer a well-written, shorter paper than a lengthy, overwritten, poor quality paper. But note I said well-written, shorter paper. So you'll find it is much more difficult to write less than it is to write more. Because you've got to think very hard about each word and each sentence when you're trying to be concise and get to the point. When you're just sitting down and writing stuff, your first draft, you tend to go overboard. I would say, in general, many students tend to go overboard. And I used to. That's how I know how to edit. Because I used to be one of those overwriters. And if I could say it in 3 sentences instead of 1, I would. And then I had to learn how to be more succinct and get to the point. So it takes a lot of effort to try and summarize a point rather than turn a sentence around. So here's the difference between like summarizing versus paraphrasing. All right. So if we were to summarize this whole paragraph, maybe we would come up with one sentence for the entire paragraph, right? And that would be a summary. So it's not copying, paste, what they said, but it's getting to the heart or the point or the essence of what it is they said. And we could probably put that in our paper. But if we wanted to take one sentence and paraphrase one sentence, right? That's the difference between summarizing and paraphrasing. So we'd have to say, how do we paraphrase this one sentence? How do we change this up so that the structure doesn't remain the same? The words aren't in the same order, that we don't just use the thesaurus function to change the word of national culture to, local culture, or internal advising as opposed to recruitment. We can't just do that. We really do need to kind of transform the sentence. So we might say here that, certain staffing practices are influenced by culture. So you might instead say culture. Okay, culture. Culture can shape or influence. We don't need to say shape or influence because influence means shape and shape means influence. Can shape instead of saying certain staffing management practices, we might say how managers recruit and recruit employees or managers and plan for succession. Rao, 2009. So that says the same thing, but not using the exact same structure of their sentence. So this would not be considered plagiarism. I might even say in Mexico. Culture, including Mexico, which, isn't quite right, but, So cultural mores or cultural norms. Norms in, how about in Mexico, can shape how managers recruit, how companies recruit managers and plan for succession. So you can see, even I would go through and maybe, try a couple times. So this does take time. But, how much do you copy and paste, or how much do you quote? How much do you summarize? How much information do you take from the other sources? How do you convey its natural essence? How do you incorporate that into an argument structure? And how do you do so in a concise way where you're not overwriting? These are all things that you have to practice doing, which is why I'd really wanted, maybe more than one student to practice doing this backwards outline and, getting rid of 100 words before today's lab so you could see what it was like. And now I would like to ask you to do it after the fact, because we didn't get very far, in the paper, like we got to the theoretical framework. And I started to show you some things. So go through here and, see if you can make sense of this and how you would change this to get rid of, certain verbiage that is unnecessary. Get to the point, they don't even get to the research aims and questions until after they've described stuff. So yeah, you just got to practice. And there are some books that are helpful. Let me see. I find, just walked way over to my book, Edit Yourself, a manual for everyone who works with words. And it's like a 1996, 1996 document. Let's see. I'm going to go crazy and show you my hello. So this is a good book right here. And it's pretty short. It's not expensive. You can certainly get it used. Things like that can be helpful. I'm going to turn off the webcam now. You can also find this online. Hold on a sec while I go here.
Yep, found it for $3.
Okay, $3. There you go. Okay, Strunk and White. All right, so I'm going to show you this. All right, share my screen. Okay, so Strunk and White. The elements of style. Okay, so you can buy it on Amazon, and I have a copy. Or look, it's free online. And in fact, Bartleby, right here. You can go here and find it all online. It's totally free. And one of the things they have, they include, elements of grammar, right? Which is very helpful. Let me tell you, please. And then they also have pop-up videos, horrible. All right, ads. They have using active voice. They also have how to omit needless words. That's one of my favorites. Okay, so how to omit needless words. And they just give some examples. This is like the classic, like 1938, maybe. I can't recall the date. It's very old. But, you know, it's a classic for a reason. So, you know, this is a good place to look for ideas. You can skim through it. It's free. You know, the other things are really inexpensive. Honestly, you can find a lot of grammar books, and I own a lot of grammar books because I am a member of the grammar police to serve and correct. I'm such a geek sometimes. Okay. So, you can look through books. You can certainly get assistance from writing editors. You can get colleagues to look through things, but sometimes you really need to read it out loud or send it to a colleague for some assistance. This is where peer collaboration is really helpful. And wow, I just realized that it's like, oh, did I show you the screen? Oh, I didn't. There we go. Yeah, I showed you that, right? This is the Strunk and White book. Free, great books online. It's really short. I mean, honestly, you can probably get this for $3 as well. But hey, it's free online, and you can go straight to the issues because you can go to the contents and find the points. Avoid a succession of loose sentences. Right? Things like that can be really helpful. So it's 9:25. Wow, we've gone a little over. So I'm assuming that y'all are kind of ready to be done. Let me stop sharing my screen, reduce the video. So practice, honestly. Practice editing. Don't turn in your first draft of your document ever. You know, go through and proofread. And it really does help to sit on it and proofread a little bit later instead of, you know, finishing it and then proofreading it, because your brain will, you know, fill in the blanks of things that you didn't actually say. So, and I'm here if you want me to give you a quick feedback as well. Okay?
Thank you.
Well, thank you all. I appreciate it. And again, I apologize about the issue with the other faculty member being accidentally on at the same time that I had planned our class. So that's something we'll have to just remind everybody of so we can avoid that in the future. And contact me if you have any questions, and I will automatically review your assignment too once you have turned it in for a grade. So if you want me to look at it before it's turned in for a grade, contact me at least a day ahead of time. And we can discuss some of these issues. Okay? Oh, and I will post this paper on Blackboard for you tomorrow. I'll give you a chance to spend some time trying it a little bit yourself before I give you what I did. Okay?
Thank you.
All right. Y'all are welcome. Thank you again. And we will see each other later. So take care and have a good night.